Okay, so you've given us quite a bit to think about this time,
Yeah.
especially this book, Antifragile.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even that subtitle, Gaining from Disorder,
Hmm.
pretty intriguing, right? But hey, that's what we do here on the Deep Dive.
Yeah, that's right.
We dig through all these articles, everything you've sent,
Hmm.
and try to pull out the stuff that really matters.
Exactly.
We want to get you up to speed quickly,
For sure. For sure.
and hopefully have some fun along the way.
Yeah. Make it a little bit of a ride.
So our mission today, the thing we're really diving into, is this whole idea of anti-fragility.
That's it.
Now, what does that even mean?
Hmm.
How does it apply not just to big, complex systems,
Right.
but to you and me, like
Yeah.
in our everyday lives?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
And maybe the most important thing, why is this idea of anti-fragility so crucial for understanding this,
Hmm.
wow, honestly, kind of crazy world that we live in?
Right.
I mean, the stuff you sent covers everything,
Yeah,
from how organisms manage to survive and evolve,
that's right.
all the way to like the messiness of modern society and those totally unexpected black swan events.
Quite a range, yeah.
Definitely an intellectual adventure.
That's for sure.
So let's start with this question that just jumps right out at you.
Okay.
What if things didn't just have to bounce back after something bad happens? What if they actually got stronger because of it?
That's where we get into this really important difference between fragile, robust, and anti-fragile.
Okay.
And you can kind of think of it like a spectrum. On one end, you've got the fragile things.
Mm-hmm.
These things hate volatility, randomness, uncertainty.
Okay.
They need everything to be calm and predictable to survive.
Mm.
Ultimately, anti-fragile is saying that we should be designing systems and even our lives to not just put up with shocks, but to actually benefit from them.
Wow.
It's like a whole different way of thinking about resilience.
So it's not just about bouncing back.
It's about getting better.
It's like going beyond resilience.
Yeah. Exactly.
So give me an example of something fragile.
Well, think about your grandmother's antique tea set.
Oh, yeah.
One wrong move, and it's shattered.
Uh-huh.
It needs to be handled super carefully
Kid gloves.
and kept in a perfectly stable environment.
Yeah, no sudden movements.
Right,
Okay, so that's fragile.
right.
What about robust? What does that look like?
So robust things are in the middle.
Okay.
They can take a hit, they can handle some disorder, but they don't really change because of it.
Mm.
They kind of weather the storm, but they don't necessarily come out any better or worse.
So they're solid,
Yeah,
dependable.
exactly.
They can handle the unexpected,
Uh-huh,
but they don't really let it affect them.
that's it.
Okay, so we've got fragile, we've got robust.
Right.
What about anti-fragile? This is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah, this is where it gets exciting.
Okay, so anti-fragile systems.
Well, they don't just survive stressors.
Yeah.
They actually need them to thrive.
Really?
They get stronger because of disorder, randomness, even errors.
It's like they feed on chaos.
In a way, yeah.
So give me an example of that.
Okay, well, think about a muscle.
Okay,
When you exercise, you stress it,
right.
but it doesn't just go back to how it was before.
No.
It actually rebuilds itself and becomes stronger.
So you're actually tearing down muscle fibers to build them back up.
That's a great analogy.
And it's not just physical systems, right?
Yeah.
This applies to other things too,
Absolutely.
like learning.
Right.
The more you learn, the more you're able to handle new information and challenges.
And think about this. Time itself can be a form of volatility.
Time.
Yeah. The more time passes, the more chances there are for random events to happen.
Uh-huh.
So for something fragile, time is a threat.
It's like a ticking time bomb.
Kind of, yeah. But for something anti-fragile,
Okay.
time and all the challenges and mistakes you face along the way actually make it stronger.
That's fascinating.
Like, think about your understanding of a subject you've been studying for years.
Okay.
The more time you spend with it, the deeper your knowledge becomes.
So time can actually be an asset for anti-fragile systems.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a really clear way to see it.
I hope so.
Now, if we have these anti-fragile systems that actually benefit from a bit of chaos,
Right.
who are the people who just don't get this? You know, the ones who crave order and predictability.
Ah, yes. The fragilista.
The fragilista.
That's right.
This is like a specific personality type that your source talks about.
It is.
So tell me about them.
Okay, so the fragilista is someone who fundamentally needs order and predictability.
Uh-huh.
And they make a really big mistake.
What's that?
They think that if something hasn't happened to them, it can't happen.
So they mistake the absence of evidence
Yes.
for evidence of absence.
Exactly. They try to control a world that is inherently unpredictable.
It's like they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, kind of.
The way your source describes them is pretty vivid.
Is it?
Suit and tie, even on a Friday.
Oh, yeah.
A little uncomfortable with anything spontaneous. Maybe a few aches and pains from a sedentary lifestyle.
Right, always at meetings.
Yeah, constantly reading the news.
Always trying to stay informed.
It's like they're trying to create this bubble of predictability around themselves.
Yeah. In a world that's anything but predictable.
Exactly.
They rely on these complicated models and forecasts to predict the future, but they don't realize that the most important events are often the ones that those models can't predict.
The black swans.
Right. And their instinct is always to suppress volatility. They don't see how it could actually be beneficial.
Interesting, guys. So we've talked about fragile, robust, and anti-fragile.
Yes.
We've talked about the fragilista. So where do we see this principle of anti-fragility at work in the real world?
Well, nature and evolution are perfect examples.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
So the amazing thing is that evolution itself is an anti-fragile process.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. Individual organisms are fragile.
Okay.
They live, they reproduce, and eventually they die.
That's the circle of life?
But the gene pool, that massive collection of genetic information, actually thrives on shocks and stressors.
Really?
Yeah, things like environmental shifts and mutations can wipe out individuals who aren't adapted to the new conditions.
Survival of the fittest.
Exactly, but the individuals who do survive pass on their genes.
The ones that help them adapt.
Right. So while individual organisms might be fragile, the gene pool as a whole gets tougher and better equipped.
Because of those challenges.
Exactly. It's like a brutal kind of efficiency.
Individual sacrifice for the benefit of the whole.
That's a good way to put it.
And your source even talks about this idea of the selfish gene,
Oh, yeah.
where the gene is actually the unit of survival.
Right.
It outlasts individual organisms.
That's a key insight.
So there's this tension between the fragility of the individual and the anti-fragility of the genetic code.
That's it.
And in a way, nature learns from its mistakes through this process. Random mutations are often harmful,
Sure.
but sometimes they create beneficial traits.
Right? And when the right stressors come along,
Yeah.
those traits allow the species to flourish.
Exactly. This brings us to a really interesting point.
What's that?
Stressors aren't always a bad thing. In fact, depriving systems of stressors can actually be harmful.
Yeah, that seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does.
But think about the biological principle of hormesis.
Hormesis.
It's where a small dose of something that would be harmful in large quantities can actually have a beneficial effect.
Interesting.
It makes the organism stronger and more resistant to larger doses later on.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, think of a vaccine.
Right.
A small, controlled exposure to a pathogen helps your body build immunity.
So it's like you're giving your body a little bit of stress
Right.
to prepare it for a bigger challenge later on.
Exactly. And this idea of getting stronger because of the shock, it's like hormesis is a biological mechanism that proves this concept.
Yeah, it shows that it actually happens in nature.
That's right.
So a little bit of controlled stress.
Can make the system more robust.
That's the idea.
Now, this principle goes beyond just biology, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what about how a little bit of background noise can actually help some people concentrate?
That's a good example.
It's like the brain has to work a little harder to filter out the distractions.
Right.
And that makes it more focused.
Exactly.
And then there's white noise for sleep.
Yeah, a lot of people find that helpful.
So it's like a little bit of managed disorder
Right.
can actually be a good thing.
Exactly.
And your source also talks about this idea of overcompensation.
Oh, yes.
What is that?
Well, sometimes systems react to stressors by becoming even stronger than they were before.
So they don't just bounce back, they overshoot the mark.
Exactly.
Interesting. So can you give me an example?
Yeah, the book mentions Seneca's observation that repeated punishment can actually fuel more hatred instead of reducing it.
That makes sense.
It's like cutting off heads in a revolution only makes the opposition stronger.
Galvanizes them.
Right. And it works in relationships, too.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, think about a relationship that faces some serious challenges.
Okay.
But instead of breaking up, they come out stronger on the other side.
That makes sense.
The book uses this phrase, refractory love.
Refractory love.
It's love that gets deeper and more intense.
Because of the obstacle.
Exactly. It's like the love overcompensates for the hardship.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, isn't it?
So it seems like our brains aren't always good at applying these lessons across different areas of our lives.
Right.
Like we might understand something in one context,
Uh-huh.
but not be able to see how it applies in another.
Exactly. And the book calls this domain dependence.
Domain dependence.
It's a really important point.
Okay, so explain that to me.
Well, it means that we tend to understand a concept really well in one specific area or domain,
Okay.
but then we fail to recognize that same concept in a different domain.
Even if the underlying principles are the same.
Exactly.
So give me an example.
Okay, well, think about how we all understand bacterial resistance to antibiotics.
Right? The bacteria adapt and become stronger
Yeah.
in response to the antibiotics.
Exactly. It's a classic example of evolution in action.
But we might not apply that same logic to societal punishment.
Right.
We might not see how punishing someone can sometimes make them more resistant or resentful.
That's it. We see the bacteria adapting,
Yeah.
but we don't necessarily see the human behavior adapting in the same way.
So we're stuck in one domain,
Exactly.
and that limits our thinking.
It does.
So being able to see these patterns across different fields,
Yes.
that's a key part of becoming wiser and more rational.
Absolutely.
Okay, now one of the most interesting concepts that you highlighted in your notes is skin in the game. How does that relate to antifragility?
Skin in the game is absolutely essential to antifragility.
Okay.
It means having something to lose, a real stake in the outcome of your decisions and actions.
So you're not just talking the talk.
No, you're walking a walk.
You're putting your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. And when people have skin in the game, they're much more careful about the risks they take.
Because they know they'll be the ones to suffer the consequences if things go wrong.
Exactly. It creates a strong incentive for responsible behavior.
And it discourages recklessness.
That's right.
So if you make a mistake, you're the one who feels the pain.
Exactly.
And your source argues that the lack of skin in the game is a major reason why our society is so fragile.
That's right.
When individuals or institutions can benefit from volatility and disorder,
Yeah.
while other people are left to deal with the negative consequences,
Right.
that creates a really dangerous imbalance.
It does.
And it talks about the rise of what it calls inverse heroes.
Oh, yes.
These are the bureaucrats, the bankers, the academics who have a lot of power.
And no accountability.
They get the rewards when things go well,
Right.
but the public is left holding the bag when things go bad.
Exactly. And the book frames this in a really interesting way.
How's that?
It looks at it from an ethical perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
It quotes a really important ethical rule.
What's that?
Thou shalt not have antifragility at the expense of the fragility of others.
So you shouldn't benefit from chaos by making other people more vulnerable to it.
Exactly.
That's a powerful statement.
It is, isn't it?
Okay, so this naturally leads us to those massive, unpredictable events that the book calls black swans.
Ah, yes.
How does antifragility help us deal with a world that's shaped by these events?
That's a great question.
Because they seem so impossible to predict.
Right. Well, black swans, as the book defines them, are those large-scale unexpected events that have huge consequences.
Like what?
Well, think about major technological breakthroughs, financial meltdowns, or global pandemics.
Those are some pretty big events.
They are. And the problem is that we tend to focus on predicting the everyday stuff.
The routine things.
Right. But in reality, much of history is driven by these rare but impactful black swans.
So we're focusing on the wrong things.
In a way, yeah.
The book uses this analogy of the turkey problem.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
So the turkey is happily eating its food every day. And then Thanksgiving comes along.
Right.
And the turkey had no way of knowing that was coming.
Because its entire experience had led it to believe that it was safe.
Exactly.
And complex systems with all their interdependencies and nonlinear reactions make these black swans even harder to see coming.
They're full of surprises.
They are. And simple cause and effect relationships often break down in these environments.
So if we can't predict black swans,
right,
how do we make ourselves more anti-fragile in the face of them?
That's the million-dollar question.
And your notes contrast the souk with the office building.
Ah, yeah.
Okay, help me understand that.
So the souk represents a decentralized bottom-up system.
Okay.
It's characterized by local variations, lots of small interactions, and even a bit of what the book calls municipal noise.
So it's like a traditional marketplace.
Exactly. It might seem chaotic, but it's also incredibly adaptable. If one merchant fails, the overall system isn't really affected.
It's like it's built to withstand shocks.
Right, and it's constantly learning and evolving through trial and error at a local level.
Interesting. So what about the office building?
The office building represents a centralized, top-down system.
Okay.
It's more organized, but also more vulnerable to a single point of failure.
So if something goes wrong at the top,
yeah,
the whole system can collapse.
That's the risk.
And your source uses Switzerland as an example of an anti-fragile system because of its decentralized political structure.
Exactly.
So when there are shocks in other parts of the world, Switzerland can actually benefit.
That's right.
Because capital and people flow there seeking safety.
It's a safe haven.
And the book contrasts this with Lenin's time in Zurich.
Oh, yeah.
Where he was plotting a highly centralized state.
A very different approach.
And in these smaller, more localized systems like the souk, there's a stronger sense of accountability.
That's right.
It's harder to hide your mistakes when everyone knows you.
And the book calls this the sting of shame.
The sting of shame.
It's a powerful motivator.
It is. And it even tells this story about an Alpine merchant.
Oh, yes.
Who preferred the disorder of war to the prison of lost freedoms under a centralized regime.
Wow.
And it compares Lebanon's growth, despite civil war, to Syria's struggles under a modernizing but centralized party.
That's a really stark contrast.
It is, and it gets to this idea that randomness spread out across many small units.
Yeah, what the book calls mediocristin.
Is far less dangerous than randomness concentrated in a few large entities.
Which is extremistan.
And extremistan makes the whole system more fragile.
Exactly.
Okay, so this connects to the benefits of disorder and variation.
Right.
And again, it seems counterintuitive.
It does.
Because we often want stability and predictability.
That's natural.
But small frequent variations can actually be a good thing.
They can. Like how? Well, think about those small forest fires. They clear out the underbrush. And that prevents a much bigger catastrophic fire later on.
So they're like a cleansing mechanism.
Exactly.
And the same thing can happen in the economy.
Right.
If there aren't any minor setbacks, then hidden vulnerabilities can build up.
Right. And when the crisis finally hits, it's much worse.
So it's like a pressure cooker.
Yeah, kind of.
And even in our daily lives, a little bit of unpredictability can be good for us.
That's right.
Like having a slightly variable schedule can actually reduce anxiety compared to a rigid routine.
It keeps you on your toes.
So it's like our systems and even our minds.
Right.
A bit of healthy friction to stay sharp and adaptable.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so your source also talks about the difference between narratives and practice.
Oh, yes.
And the dangers of over-intellectualizing things.
Right. Well, it points out that public entities often need to tell stories to justify their actions. Right? They need a narrative.
But businesses don't have to do that.
No.
They can just focus on profit.
Exactly. Yeah. And the book emphasizes the intellectual superiority of practice.
What does that mean?
It means that people who are actually doing things often don't need complex theories to be successful. They just do it.
They figure it out as they go along.
Right. Think about someone who can ride a bike perfectly.
Okay.
But they couldn't explain the physics behind it.
That's a good example.
So the doing comes before the understanding. And this over-reliance on intellectualization can lead to iatrogenics.
Isogenics.
Which is harm caused by well-intentioned interventions.
Oh, like when doctors prescribe a medication that ends up having unintended side effects?
Exactly. That's a classic example of iatrogenics in medicine. But the book argues that this happens in other fields, too.
Like economics and politics.
Right, where interventions often have unintended consequences.
Okay, and then there's this phrase, the lecturing birds how to fly effect. That one really stuck with me.
It's a great phrase, isn't it?
It is. It perfectly captures this illusion that all technological progress comes from formal science, from institutions and universities.
Yeah, but it overlooks the role of tinkering and trial and error and all the inventions that have been made by people who weren't academics.
Like all those clergymen who invented things.
Exactly. It challenges this top-down view of innovation.
And it makes you realize that progress often comes from unexpected places.
That's right.
And the book tells this story about an economist who was questioning these traders about their understanding of complex math.
Right.
And the traders were like, we don't need to know the math.
Yeah.
We're using these financial instruments successfully.
Right.
We're making money.
They had a practical understanding.
Exactly.
It's like formal knowledge is often the visible part, but not necessarily the most important part.
Okay.
Think about cooking.
Right.
It relies on optionality and experience-based evolution of recipes.
Right.
You try things out, you adjust, you improve over time.
It's not like pure physics, which is more theory-driven.
Exactly.
And think about how the internet came about.
Okay.
It was a result of military research.
Right.
with a completely different goal in mind.
Unintended consequences.
Exactly.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And this leads to the idea that less is more. We often overcomplicate things.
We do.
And we overlook simpler, more obvious solutions.
That's right.
And the book gives this great example of a shipwreck hunter.
Oh, yeah.
Who used a really simple method to find treasure.
What did he do?
He focused on where the currents would likely carry debris instead of using sophisticated technology.
So he used his knowledge of the environment.
Exactly.
And it worked.
It did.
And this connects to the concept of tamed and harvested randomness through optionality.
Break that down for me.
So it's about making small calculated bets where the downside is limited, but the upside is potentially huge.
So like random drilling in oil exploration.
Exactly.
You drill a bunch of holes.
Right.
And most of them come up dry.
But if you hit one big pocket,
then it pays for all the failures.
That's the idea.
So it's about recognizing and capitalizing on opportunities that come from uncertainty.
Exactly.
But the book also warns against the green lumber fallacy.
Oh, yes. What's that?
It's mistaking superficial correlations for real understanding.
So just because two things seem to be related doesn't mean that one causes the other.
Right.
Okay, and all of this underscores the dangers of over-intervention.
Yes.
Trying to eliminate all volatility and variation.
It's like we're trying to control things that are inherently uncontrollable.
And the book even calls this tendency crimes against life.
Wow.
It's a strong statement.
It is.
But it makes sense when you think about it. Our bodies and minds need those fluctuations.
They do.
You know, you were talking about how you felt this pressure to be happy all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And how that actually made you feel worse.
It did.
And it's like mood swings are a source of intelligence and creativity. It's how we process information and make decisions.
That's right.
And think about how our ancestors lived.
Okay.
They had to deal with all sorts of unpredictable stimuli. They were never bored.
But modern life can be very different.
It can.
We have these rigid structures and routines.
Jobs, homework,
exactly.
bureaucracy.
It can be stifling.
And the book talks about this idea of festina lente.
Ah, yes.
Which means make haste slowly.
It's about finding the right balance between action and inaction.
And it also mentions Lao Tzu's concept of wu wei.
As of achievement.
It's about achieving things without forcing them.
Letting things unfold naturally.
And it even suggests that procrastination isn't always a bad thing. It can be a natural defense against over-intervention.
It's like our bodies and minds are telling us to slow down.
To resist the Procrustean bed of modernity.
That's a great way to put it.
But we need to be careful about removing rules indiscriminately. Like, what works in one context might not work in another.
Exactly.
Like the Drachten effect.
Where they removed traffic signals in a town in the Netherlands.
And it actually improved traffic flow.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we should get rid of all traffic lights.
Of course not.
Or speed limits on highways.
Right.
So it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about the nonlinearity of things.
Okay.
Like wealth risk biological responses.
Right.
These things don't always follow a straight line.
They don't.
So can you give me some examples?
Sure. Well, beyond a certain point, accumulating more wealth doesn't necessarily lead to more happiness.
Interesting.
It can actually create more problems and anxieties.
So it's not a linear relationship.
No, it's not.
And what about risk?
Well, the book uses the example of New York City traffic to illustrate how adding more cars doesn't just linearly increase congestion.
Wow.
It can create a much more drastic, nonlinear increase in travel time.
So it's like a tipping point.
Yeah, and delaying necessary corrections or crises can actually make the eventual damage much worse.
It's like letting a small problem fester until it becomes a huge problem.
Exactly.
And your notes mention something called Jensen's inequality and this hidden benefit of antifragility that comes from convexity.
Right.
Can you explain that in a way that I can understand?
Okay, well, imagine two paths.
All right.
One is perfectly smooth, and the other is very bumpy.
Okay.
But they both have the same average elevation. If you're walking on the smooth path, your experience will be pretty average. But if you're on the bumpy path, the average of all those ups and downs might actually be higher.
Okay.
Or lower than the smooth average.
Interesting.
And Jensen's inequality is a mathematical way of describing this phenomenon.
So saying that the average of something can be different from the average of a function of that thing.
Right.
Especially when that function is curved or convex. So for an anti-fragile system, this bumpiness, the volatility, actually leads to a better average outcome over time.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Well, think about the traffic example again.
Okay.
The average number of cars might be the same, whether it's a constant flow or stop-and-go traffic, but the average travel time is much worse when there are fluctuations.
Right, because you're constantly speeding up and slowing down.
Exactly. But for an anti-fragile system, those fluctuations can actually create opportunities for improvement.
So it's like the system learns from the disruptions.
Right.
And what about biological systems?